All right, so welcome again to today's webinar, the Language Assessment and Proficiency Tools webinar, an ANA National webinar. At this time, I'm going to pass it off to the Pacific Region Director, Keone Nunes. Keone?
Hello, Matt. Hello, Mike Kako. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. And this is, again, the Language Assessment and Proficiency Tools. And we would like to always welcome you in this most important of subject areas as far as many of us are concerned. We are Kaananiau, and we are the Pacific Region Technical Assistance Office, working in conjunction with the ANA. And I am the Regional Director for the office. And at Kaananiau, we provide any technical assistance and training that is necessary for you to write and manage, if you need, ANA project. Kaananiau consists of several staff members. Matt, who you have heard, is featured in this photo, and he's on your extreme left. Next to him is Napua Harbottle, our training director. In the middle is our technical assistant specialist, Dennis Wong, along with Susan White, who is also a technical assistant specialist, and myself, Keone Nunes, on the far right. ANA promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. And the vision for ANA is that Native communities are thriving. There are several upcoming ANA webinars that I would really suggest that you put on your calendar, because these webinars will give you additional insight as to how to better and maintain your project. Yeah. The next webinar that we're going to have, a national webinar, is on July 25th, and that's the fourth part of the evaluation series. And this webinar will be talking about how to use evaluation results to build community support and receive additional funding. This is, again, something very important for all of us to consider, especially with the big competitions within national grant awards. August 1st is finding foundational funding. Again, looking at different ways of funding the projects that is most important to our community. And the third that I want to make you aware of is the Sustainability Series Part 1. And this will be happening on August 8th. Again, all of these are very important for you to get a better idea of how it can be ancillary information for your projects and how you can use this information to better the projects that is so dearly needed within all of our communities. With that, I would like to hand the rest of the introductions over to our ANA Commissioner, Commissioner Lillian Sparks.
Thank you so much, Keone. We are honored to have two excellent presenters for this webinar, Dr. Lori Quigley and Dr. Ku Kahakalau. Both Dr. Quigley and Dr. Kahakalau have wonderful information to share about their work on developing language assessment and proficiency tools. So we have three goals for this webinar, and these goals are to share updates on ANA's work on native language programs, to connect people working on native language projects, and to share expertise on language assessment tools. For the first goal, ANA has been busy building out our native language program, and there are a few updates I would like to share. We've been able to develop a native language memorandum of agreement, and we've had that signed among ANA, the Department of Education's White House Initiative on Indian Education, as well as the Bureau of Indian Education at the Department of Interior. We also have native language calls and webinars on a regular basis. We have our new native language Google Plus community, and then we're also supporting native language best practices. As we've heard from our native language grantees, having support is huge, and we need full community support and strong parents, and people have to believe in doing the work. In November of 2012, the Native Language MOA was signed between HHS, DOI, and Department of Education. The MOA provides a framework for coordination across federal agencies for the purpose of preserving, protecting, and promoting the rights and freedom of Native Americans to use, practice, and develop Native American languages. ANA and ACF are busy working on developing strategies to implement this MOA and improve coordination amongst the ACF offices. Part of that coordination is sharing information about the ways we are working to build community amongst ANA native language grantees, potential applicants, and others that are interested. This webinar is part of that goal. We are happy to have merged the bi-monthly language call to a webinar to expand our network. I want everyone to know about our Native Language Google Plus community as well. This community, with 93 members, is working to share updates and info about native languages. We hope it serves as a place to network as well. The link for this community is in the chat box, and you must request membership so it isn't totally public, and we encourage all of you to click the link and sign up. We also have a brief on native language best practices on our website. This is from ANA grantees about their best practices. An example of what you can find on that best practices sheet is the quote on the slide, that having support is huge. You need full community support and strong parents, and people have to believe in doing this. That is a reference into how to create a successful language project. To build on these best practices, we have two experts on native languages on this call, Dr. Lori Quigley and Dr. Kahakalau. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sparks. We'll start with Dr. Quigley. Dr. Lori Quigley is a professor and dean of the Esteves School of Education at the Sage Colleges. With a PhD in language, learning, and literacy, coupled with 15 years of elementary and secondary classroom experience as a literary specialist, Lori has taught language arts methods to pre-service teachers and clinical reading courses to graduate students. Her research interests include second language acquisition, culturally relevant pedagogy, learning community theory, and multi-generational trauma. Lori, who is a member of the Seneca Nation, holds a gubernatorial appointment on the New York State Minority Health Council. She serves as the Associate State Coordinator for the American Council on Education's Office of Women in Higher Education, whose primary goal is empowering women to access leadership positions in higher education. This past spring, Lori was elected by her colleagues to the Executive Board of the New York Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. Recently, Lori was appointed to the National Global Diversity Committee of the American Association for Colleges of Teacher Education. Lori?
I send you all peace and well wishes to all of my relations. In my language, Seneca, my name is best translated as She Climbs, and I'm a member of the Wolf Clan. So I'm going to move this ahead a little bit, and what I'm going to do is in 20 minutes sort of give you a little bit of background on some of the history of Seneca language programs and what we've done in working with the language programs over the past 10 years or so. And some of this information I have shared at ANA grantee sessions in the past and with other indigenous language groups across the nation. So I'm going to move it up quickly. Just to give you a little background of where I'm kind of located, I'm actually in the capital region today of New York State. Seneca Nation tribal territories are located in western New York State. We actually have a number of tribal territories and 3 major language groups in western New York State with Seneca language. What I want to emphasize before I even get into assessment is I'm going to start a little bit about some research that we looked at, and what we had to do was basically to assess the state of language instruction and acquisition first. And I think you're going to have a copy of this PowerPoint, so I'm going to go quickly through this, but you know, there's always the good and there's always the bad. But we really need to take a self-assessment of where we stood before we could move further and strengthen the programs that were already in existence among the Seneca territories. With that, we ended up proposing a plan, and that plan was designed with one key critical feature, which I think everybody would agree with. In order to have ownership, we created a grassroots community effort and collaboration. And what we did is essentially we had immersion camps. It involved teachers and elders taking risks. We began sharing limited resources, and we really began wholeheartedly into developing curriculum and assessments that went with that curriculum. And it really resulted in the creation of very innovative programs. So basically what we wanted to do was to create sets of modules in Seneca language instruction that could be used in our early childhood learning centers by Seneca language teachers in a K-12 setting in the school districts, and also in some of the community classes that we have in the Seneca Nation community. And what we were able to do is to use the wisdom of our elders. Haudenosaunee basically is our term for longhouse people, and we try to embed as much song, dance, everything about our family systems, our customs, and our traditions into the curriculum itself. The pedagogy focused on essentially 4 areas that we researched that we found to be the most critical to continue community-based language programs. And those were and still are immersion, total physical response and master apprentice models, teacher education, and then working on policy and advocacy. With immersion, we sort of embedded the strategies surrounding total physical response, or TPR, and master apprentice, and following the model of Leanne Hinton out in California. And with that, we taught everything that we could find out about immersion and those techniques to our fluent elders, and also to our Seneca language teachers through weekend retreats and summer immersion camps. Very challenging, high risk, ownership sphere. We had teachers who were learning the language at the same time they were teaching the language. And so scheduling all of this when so many other activities are going on in the communities was also a challenge. And then to teach people substantial lessons and activity planning we found to be also a challenge. As far as teacher education, we taught them content through the involvement of fluent speakers, our elders. We also taught them pedagogical instruction as far as second language acquisition strategies, and really what is outcomes-based learning all about. One thing I'm going to sort of try and talk to you about for about 2 minutes is that we relied on the knowledge of some technology that is used primarily in speech-language pathology, because after all, we are working with speech and we are working with language. And most of our language is an oral-based language. The way we've always taught, we've always passed it on orally, not so much reading and writing. So in working with early childhood centers, knowing that best practices also involves the creation of learning centers, which are developmentally appropriate, we selected a number of what's called assistive devices to incorporate into each of the early childhood learning center classrooms. And what you'll see in the next couple of slides are essentially some of those items. You've all seen building blocks that preschoolers use. We labeled everything in Seneca language, and we taught the teachers what each of those words were in Seneca, in building children's concept development about shapes, colors, telling time, and so on. We use this little push button that you see in the Staples commercials on TV. I don't think they're as magical, but they're designed to pre-record a series of messages in sequence taught throughout the day. So if it's how to take your coats off, how to hang your coats, how to brush your teeth, all those kinds of daily routines that might be, that are always in a preschool classroom. What it also did too is when you have classroom teachers who don't know Seneca or are learning Seneca for the first time, it helps them to record. It helps them to have pre-recorded messages to reinforce the language that they're learning while they're teaching the children at the same time. We also did this through another thing called a 6-level communicator. You can Google any of these items. We did it with a language master, which has traditionally been used for 40 years in language classrooms. And what we did is we embedded our own Seneca language words, phrases, sentences, commands, pictures that the children could recognize from our own reservation community. One is called Speech Therapists of Mirror. Kids love to see themselves in the mirror, and basically we taught them in a learning center how to press the button, how to listen for the language that's pre-recorded, and how to say it back and watch themselves actually talk into the mirror. While we were doing this, we trained the classroom teachers to create and use observation checklists, basically to see if the children were actually doing what they were instructed to do in learning centers with the language, and were they actually picking up the language and improving their language skills. Well, that leads us into curriculum assessment. I, as a teacher educator, always believe in starting out with curriculum so we can understand how we got to the assessment part of it. And we ended up asking ourselves 3 basic questions. What do we want students to be able to do with the language? In other words, what are the proficiency targets? We had never even thought about that before this. And then how will we know what they can do with it? So what kinds of performance assessments did we need to create? And then how do we plan instruction in order for them to meet these targets that we were about to establish? So in other words, what content and activities would we need to plan for in the classroom to ensure that they're going to meet these targets in their language acquisition? Because we're in a preschool setting, and I know that, in education, we hear so much about accountability, and in our preschool settings, a lot of our classrooms are federally funded Head Start classrooms for federally recognized tribes. So we needed to have some substantial assessments that were created. And so what we basically did, we started out with standardized instruments that have been used in schools for many, many years. One is called the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, or PPVT, which sort of assesses verbal capacity for very young children all the way up to adults. And then we know that because we are also teaching a curriculum that embedded the concepts of our customs, culture, and traditions, we also wanted to find something about social skills with children. So we took a look at a standardized assessment called Social Skills Rating Scale. In taking a look at those assessments, we basically created and piloted Seneca-specific assessments, which you should have been able to download copies of these when you logged into the webinar this afternoon. And one is called the Test of Anundawaka Oral Language Tool, or Our Language. We call it Tool. We like acronyms. It's easy for people to remember. One is called the Preschool Assessment of Native Cultural Elements, or PANT. And then the other is the Seneca Language Classroom Observation Checklist. With regard to the PANT assessment, which is the first one that you would see in your packet, the Preschool Assessment of Native Cultural Elements, we basically use a photo as a prompt, and you can see the teacher here using the photo and asking specific questions that you can see the prompt questions on the documents that you received ahead of time. And then the teacher then would check off what the child said, okay? And very easy to use, very culturally based. So in the first part of your packet, you should see 3 pages that sort of look like this. And that's as easy as it is. And doesn't take long to administer. doesn't take long to actually take a look at and assess where children are, or even beginner language learners. And very easy to use, easy to teach teachers. The next one, well, you can see our binders pretty much look like, for the next one, they pretty much look like a Peabody picture vocabulary test. We just hired a local artist to draw some generic pictures to follow the test. Basically what it is, it's a test that's administered by saying prompts in Seneca language and by having the children point to the picture that relates to the definition of that prompt. And that's how we actually assess their capacity for language. How much of the language are they actually learning? So these are the first 2 pages in the handout with the tool assessment that you have with directions. I think that any language community can probably replicate this and create their own. It's easy. If you know anything about a PPVT, you can ask the classroom teacher or reading teacher to show you how it's used. And basically you can create your own by picking out your own words. And so for example, if somebody's asking the question for the word sky in Seneca, the child would then point to the 4th picture on the assessment itself. And that's really how easy it is to actually administer and to assess. The next one that I included in the packet today is what we call the Seneca Language Classroom Observation Rubric, because we also want to just assess to see if we were providing language teachers and classroom teachers information on our culture and our traditions that we wanted them to teach to children. And we really wanted to see the degree to which the teacher was actually implementing the Seneca Language program curriculum into his or her classroom. I want to point out that you can't really see it on the screen, but you can see it in the handout that you should have been able to download, that the classroom observation rubric was not designed to be an evaluation of the teacher, of the children, or any other support staff in the classroom. Basically, if we use the same rubric for all observations and all teachers, we wanted to see if we were doing a good job in providing a curriculum that could actually be implemented into a classroom. And so that's really what it is. And so you basically see the criteria on the left-hand side are program components that we're actually taking a look at to see to what degree, whether it's emerging, developing, accomplished, or exemplary as far as the implementation is concerned in the classroom itself. What did this do for us? Basically what this did for us is that it helped us to see where we found weaknesses in the curriculum so we could go back and strengthen the curriculum. If it was emerging, we tried to figure out, why was it emerging? Was it that the teacher needed more support? Was it that the teacher herself or himself was still at the emerging stage of development in his or her own language? And we also took a look at the other end of the scale. What were items that led to somebody in a classroom from what we're observing being accomplished or exemplary, and how could we use that to feed back into those to make their classroom use and implementation of the Seneca Language program stronger than what we were actually seeing. You'll notice that the 3rd page in that assessment rubric steers away a little bit from a rubric. In addition to having the 2 pages of the rubric where we're just, clicking off, are they emerging or are they at a mastery level, we asked them questions in personal interviews with teachers, such as what were 3 things that you feel are effective, interesting, or especially worthwhile about your classroom, and taking a look at it, everything as best as we could from a very positive stance. And how would you describe the way that children are learning Seneca language in your classroom? And then what things would you want to know more about in order to help Seneca language, children learn Seneca language? What do you think about the materials? How do you think the children are responding to the materials? Do you think you've had sufficient training? And what about support as you try things? And then anything else that you would like to add. We found that when the teachers are providing us this information, they see that we're taking their opinions and their feedback with a lot of weight, and that also helps to ensure more ownership by the teachers and the curriculum materials that they're using as well. Essentially, over time, what we saw is that we were getting tangible results, not only with the teachers, but really with everything, in what the children were learning in the classrooms, but as well as the families. Everything that was given to the children in the classrooms, we made copies of and replicated and sent home with the children so that the families could use the materials themselves too. Using a lot of media sources, from CDs to books on CD, etc., where they could reinforce everything that was being taught in the classroom, also in the families and in the home. And then just finding that a new generation is really working towards embracing the culture, learning more about the culture, learning more about language, not only inside one of our schools, okay, but also out in the community as well. And having to have a set of well-defined goals and objectives, we also found to be very beneficial. I don't kind of have all the answers to this, and I'm constantly looking up resources. There are many. And that's what's wonderful about the internet today, is that just go on there. I think that when you begin to create your own assessments, own is ownership. And when people have ownership, assessment can be a scary thing, but if they created them themselves and they're very familiar with the assessment, teachers are really more likely to use the assessments and not being afraid of being assessed as well. So I have a couple of sites on here that I know in my last ANA language workshop that I did, people found to be very, they really like those a lot. A lot of people don't even know how to make rubrics. There are many out there, and so I also put a little link on there to help you with rubrics as well. And I always tell people, if you want more information, I'll gladly share it. Just email me. But if you email me, please tell me where we've met or where you've heard me speak, and that kind of helps me to help you to find answers. Yahweh.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Quigley. For those joining a little late, that was Dr. Lloyd Quigley, Professor and Dean at the Esteves School of Education at the Sage Colleges. I would like to also remind everyone that we'll be taking questions at the end. You can either do that through the chat box or by raising your hand using the hand icon that you see above. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Kahakalau, part of a family of native speakers of Hawaiian, German, and English. Dr. Kahakalau has taught primarily Hawaiian, but also German, French, Spanish, and English at the K-12 university and adult education level since 1985. In the mid-1990s, Dr. Kahakalau began a longitudinal indigenous heuristic action research project measuring the impact of traditional Hawaiian education practices on indigenous students, which led her to become the first person in the world to receive a PhD in indigenous education. In 2000, Dr. Kahakalau founded and for 10 years directed Hawaii's first native-focused, fully accredited K-12 charter school on Hawaiian Island. Together with her husband and their bilingual daughters, she is a steadfast native practitioner and cultural expert. For the past year, she has been working at INPEACE as project director of Basic Hawaiian, an ANA-funded Hawaiian language revitalization project. Dr. Kahakalau, welcome.
Sorry, Dr. Kahakalau seems to be having some problems with her audio.
Aloha mai kako. Aloha mai kako. O wau o ku Kahakalau. Ke noho nei wau mako kui haile anui ku aloha e hui pume o ko I kia kakahiaka nei. Good morning, my name is Ku, and I'm very happy to be with you this morning to talk a little bit about a Hawaiian language proficiency scale. We've developed this scale to really find out where we are as Hawaiians in learning our own language. And before I get started with the scale itself, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a context in regards to the Hawaiian language. In 1778, when Westerners first made contact with Hawaii. There were about 1 million Native Hawaiians living on our islands, and all of us naturally spoke our language. 100 years later, we were decimated. 96% of the population was gone. We had another 50,000 primarily immigrant Asian workers joining us on our islands, and all of the people in 1890, about 90,000 of them were Hawaiian language speakers. Then U.S. invaded our country, and within another 100 years, we had shrunk down to about 10 to 16,000 Hawaiian as an additional language speakers. However, as a people, you know, we have been growing continuously, and there's about 450,000 part Hawaiians, about half of them in Hawaii and about half of them outside of Hawaii. Now, when we talk about Hawaiian as an additional language, there are all kinds of issues. The first part is that we're very, very fortunate that we still have a native Hawaiian language speaking community. They're very small, about 500 or a little bit more maybe, coming from the island of Ni'ihau, that with a very unique dialect. But we're very fortunate that that community has continuously spoken Hawaiian, and the language has been passed down from grandparents, parents to children and grandchildren. However, sadly, they only make up 0.1% of the native population. However, thanks to all kinds of Hawaiian language efforts over the last 30 years, we have grown a population of between 10 to 16,000, what I call Hawaiian as an additional language speakers. And we are located on all the islands and even on the continent. But again, we only make up about 2% of our population. In addition, there are all kinds of issues with this definition of Hawaiian as additional language speakers, because the numbers that we're using are based primarily on Hawaiian language enrollment in either Hawaiian language immersion schools, in public and private high schools, colleges, and in community education programs, including virtual classes. But the reality is that we have no clue at what level of mastery these students that are enrolling in these classes are. There's not even a set definition of what a Hawaiian as an additional language speaker is, and really no instruments exist to measure the level of proficiency or to gauge the fluency of these speakers. And so in 2011, we decided to really look at, you know, what can we do to start measuring proficiency, and we began to develop this Hawaiian language proficiency scale. The important thing for us was that this was a scale that was created for Hawaiians by Hawaiians, because most other language scales are developed for people who want to go to another country to do business or to travel, which is very, very different than the need, than the type of purposes and needs that we have to learn our language. The other part is that we wanted to focus on what is the language used today, similar to what Lori was mentioning. You know, how and where do we actually use the language today, and where is it important to be able to speak Hawaiian? The other part was that while most of our people don't speak Hawaiian anymore, many have huge amounts of vocabulary. They know chants, they know songs, they know all kinds of things. And so far, this knowledge has been ignored when it comes to language assessment in general. The other part is that for us, it's not just about language, it's about being Hawaiian, practicing Hawaiian cultural traditions and values on a daily basis. That is just as important, because the language to us cannot live without these practices. And so what we have done is we have looked at, you know, how have we been teaching language in the last 30 years, and this we meaning is primarily myself and my husband, and some of the Hawaiian-focused charter schools, some of the people within those that have been teaching Hawaiian language, and how can we then create a scale that would align with that type of language learning. The other part was, how can I use this scale to assess this project that I'm working on right now, which is called Basic Hawaiian, which is an ANA-funded Hawaiian language revitalization project that uses a radically new way of learning the language using technology and hands-on, but just a different way of looking at language learning. That would be a whole separate webinar that I'm not going to get into today. I do feel very strongly that what we're doing could be used by other indigenous or lesser taught languages. We presented this scale in Bangkok at a conference for lesser taught languages, and many people there felt that this is something that they could adapt to their needs as well. So I'm hoping that it is something that you can look at and see that there may be 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 things that might be useful to you as you are developing your own language proficiency scales. The methodology that we use is called Indigenous Heuristic Action Research, and it has aspects of indigenous research, heuristic research, and action research in it. And I don't need to go into that at this point, but just to let you know that we didn't just you know, pull it out of our ear, so to speak, but it is something that is part of a longitudinal indigenous research project that we've been involved in for the last 25+ years. What this scale is designed to is to measure Hawaiian language proficiency by quantifying and recognizing, first of all, existing knowledge, and then providing a roadmap for future language studies. It'll allow us to chart language acquisition, in other words, the growth over time, and we're hoping by Hawaiians realizing how much they already know, rather than focusing how much they don't know, we can motivate them to continue the study of the language and get to a point where they can be fluent again. In my case, my grandfather was pure Hawaiian and part of that last generation of native language speakers. My father, like everybody his generation, knew a few words. I went to school again to study Hawaiian language, and my children are fluent speakers again. However, we are the minority. For most of them, it stopped at my father's generation of knowing a few words, and in my generation also knowing again a few words. But we feel very strongly that by knowing how much we do know, that will help us to get back to being able to speak fluently or be able to converse in Hawaiian. And so our scale has 6 levels. That's not something unique. When you look at the ACTFL, for example, they also have 6 scales. And we put Hawaiian names to them, from Holona to Loea, which means expert, and English words to them, and then sort of a general description of what the proficiency looks like at these various levels. For Basic Hawaiian, the program that I'm working on right now, our objective is to get people to this number 3, Kahakalau, or ready or equipped level, which means that they'll have a basic mastery, still need some effort and will still be making mistakes, but a basic mastery of being able to converse in Hawaiian. Within our scale, we've created at this point 7 categories. Some of them have multiple assessments like conversation and protocol, and I'll go through those right now. Again, these are the things that are important to us as Hawaiians. So vocabulary, many people already know lots of vocabulary, and so you wanted to make sure that there was a gauge that showed how much you already knew and showed how much you were continuously learning. Proverbs to us are very important because that's the philosophy of our elders, and our elders spoke in Proverbs all the time. We have a book of over 2,000 Proverbs, and so on and so forth. So for vocabulary, we just pick specific numbers, and we're using numbers that are going to be easy for us to remember and that are sort of consistent among themselves, but these are completely arbitrary numbers on one level. In other words, the amount of vocabulary that people should know or shouldn't know varies greatly. You can talk to language experts, and some of them will talk about 5,000 words, others will talk about 15,000 words. So, there's such a huge span or a range of how much vocabulary you need to know to be in a certain section. But for us right now, we looked at these being the numbers that we selected. And so again, if in your language you want to pick different numbers, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. And so in order to assess this vocabulary, what Basic Hawaiian does is that we give you 3 pictures, and then you have to pick the correct picture. So in this case, you would pick the far left, and that would be a pua keni keni. That's the type of flower that's on the far left there. And that's how you just go through a thing like that. You see 3 pictures, you hear the word, and you you click on whichever is the correct word, and that's how you can tell how many words you know. And our basic Hawaiian vocabulary list goes up to 1,000 words. So these would be 1,000 words. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't other words that you know, but we're just using various categories, and these are the words and about 16 words within each category. For Proverbs, as I said, very, very important to us. We also selected a number that we felt was a good number in terms of what people nowadays know or don't know. And so, again, I said earlier, we have about a book with about over 2,000 Proverbs. So knowing 100 Proverbs is really, when you think of 2,000, not that much. However, when you think about how much people that are actually claim to be Hawaiian language speakers, how many Proverbs they know, 100 is actually a pretty high number. And so to assess the Proverbs, we just have a test that has fill in the blanks. And so in this case, it would be Eola Kainoa is a proverb that says, may the name live. And that is a proverb that is used when somebody's, when an ancestral name is given to a new baby. For songs, again, there is people who know hundreds of Hawaiian songs but cannot communicate in Hawaiian. And so for us, we thought about 50 Hawaiian songs. Knowing those is a good place. However, as I said, there may be people who know a lot more than that. And so same thing again, we have a fill in the blanks, e Hawaii e kuone ha naue, Hawaii, sands of my birth, which would be the word to your right, that would go into that blank there. Chants, same thing here. If you are a Hawaiian practitioner, you will know lots of Hawaiian chants. If you are not, you may know only one or two at the most. But this is something that we've been growing continuously over the last few decades, is introducing the larger population to chants that we're finding in Hawaiian books. We have one of the largest indigenous, if not the largest indigenous library in the world, with lots of things preserved. And so, again, we figured 50 chants is a good place to start as a native practitioner in terms of being Makau-Kau already, which is where we're trying to get our current group that we're working with through Basic Hawaiian. So in this case, Iola no Kikino would be the middle word there, would be go into there, and that is a popular chant or a pule, a prayer. We don't use the word prayers because you know, we're working in the schools as well, and so we call everything protocol or chants. But technically, this is a prayer that thanks the deities for the food that we're about to receive. In the conversation category, we have 7 different levels to date, starting with greetings, and not just greeting people, but also greeting places, greeting the forest, greeting the spirits in the forest as we enter the forest and things like that, at introductions, descriptions, etc. And I will share a little bit about how we assess those. So we just did very, very simple rubrics, but this is the kind of format that can be used by pretty much everybody. So if your students can do just simple, you know, saying hello and goodbye in the language, they're still at a 0 level. If they can do 1-sentence greetings of people, of places, etc., then that's a 1. If they know how to do a couple, maybe a minute of memorized greetings and protocol, which many of our students can in the various levels of where they're learning, they would be at a 2. If they can do a basic reading of a few minutes of peoples and places and elements, and in our case, that includes chanting, they would be at a 3. When they can include metaphor, and that is a very important aspect for us in Hawaiian, we call it kauna, or a double meaning of metaphor, meaning that we don't just tell you, you know, that the grass is green kind of a thing, but the way we hide the information poetically is kind of shows how strong we are in the language and how beautiful our language is, so that we can play with it. And then when you can do elaborate poetic greetings, basically chants that go, you know, integrate place names, integrate personal names, integrate deities, etc., then you would be at this very high 5, which is the loya, the expert level. For our introduction rubrics, it's the same thing, you know, starting out with name only, going all the way to giving very poetic introductions of people and places that could take a long time. Like this could be a 15-minute introduction kind of a thing. Descriptions. When a person can describe a place using one-word descriptions, like this is a valley, the valley is green, the valley is big, the valley is small, whatever, versus a basic description that has a little bit more transitions in it and a little bit more adjectives in it, all the way to these very, as I said, poetic descriptions of place that our elders would be using, those who are the very few that are still native speakers. When it comes to questions and answers, it's very similar, you know, starting with the one-word questions and answers at the level 1, all the way to going to, instead of asking direct questions, all the questions are sort of indirect questions, and you first have to figure out what the question is because there's so much counter or double meaning in there, and then your answer would have that same amount of double meaning or metaphors or just poetic kind of references. Talk story, you know, conversing in 1 or 2 responses versus mostly memorized responses in terms of how are you, I'm fine, etc., to simple responses where you still have lots of mistakes, and then getting to responses where you can talk pretty much about every popular subject with some mistakes and some effort, all the way down to the complex multi-level responses. Our formal communication rubric, that will be basically doing presentations in Hawaiian, starting from 1 sentence memorized all the way to very complex information and ideas that again use lots of poetry and double meanings. Storytelling, we start out with being able to tell Hawaiian stories in Pidgin English, but using lots of Hawaiian words, all the way to expert storytelling, where the audience participates, where there's extensive body language and lots of poetic references and double meaning. For our protocol rubric, and again, that's because we don't really want to use the words prayers, etc., we've decided to break that down into 2 aspects. One of them is the knowledge of these chants and prayers. The other one is the practice of these chants and prayers, because it's one thing to say, well, I know 10 chants, but if I never ever perform them or use them or do them, then to us they're really not worth that. That knowledge really isn't worth that much. And so for us, just to set a little context, protocol means doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason, and it's really an effort to balance and to center ourselves and to invoke divine guidance. And so for us, and I think this is very similar to most Native people, we start and end the day and all activities and all meetings with what we call protocol. We greet and interact with guests doing protocol before we enter houses and forests and sacred sites, before we plant, harvest, and eat, before we do any kind of healing or any other spiritual practice and ceremonies, we engage what we call protocol. And so the protocol scale, again, has a specific number of protocol chants and prayers. So this is a little bit different from the chants one, and then these are just specific chants that deal with protocol. Commonly known chants and prayers, and commonly known meaning just since the last couple of decades, because many of these chants were unknown in the 80s, let's say. And then getting to the point where you can actually create your own chants and prayers, where you are at a level where you can compose instantly new chants and new prayers, not just adaptations and variations of the existing ones, but really chants and prayers that can stand on their own, and that would be your number 5 scale, obviously. As far as the practice is concerned, you know, if you're only 5 times in your life you've been involved in any of this kind of protocol, then there's really that's a 0 basically. If you do if you involved in certain ceremonies once a year or up to 5 times a year, that would only be a 1. Some people are involved a little bit more. They go to maybe something every month. In our Hawaiian focused charter schools, for example, all of the students, and in our Hawaiian immersion schools as well, our students are involved from Monday to Friday in doing protocols. So they would be, a lot of them would be threes, not because very few of them actually practice those same things at home and do it every day. And then there's obviously the hardcore ones, you know, that do all of these things all the time. And for our reading rubric, we had to especially adjust it to our reality as with Hawaiian language, where there's a language that was written initially that didn't have markers, meaning glottal stops and macrons, and then so some people so if somebody's not a native speaker, to be able to read without markers is very, very difficult. So we start out with, you know, being able to read words with those okinas and kahakos, those glottals and those macrons, and then slowly getting to the point where you can read without these markers. And so we have several categories that are under development still yet: spelling, comprehension, writing, this poetic composition, or what we call haku, of oli, of chants, and of songs, and also specialty or cultural expertise. We want to create a category so that somebody who comes out of tattooing, for example, or who comes out of hula, or who comes out of a special cultural expertise, will be able to measure where they are at in terms of knowing vocabulary that goes with that expertise, knowing specific songs and chants, again, that go with those expertise, or any other types of knowledge. And so, mahalo nui au ko pakahia pau no ki ia ho'olohe ana mai ia'u. I want to thank you for allowing me to share this short presentation with you. This is Waipio Valley, where we reside. So you can see how very blessed we are. And again, I'm sending my aloha for myself and my family, and blessings to all of you.
This is Tom Dannon again from ANA. Mahalo, Ku, for your presentation. I'm now going to hand things off to Keone for some final notes and to take questions and answers. So, Keone?
Aloha. Yes, now that you've heard a lot of things from both of our presenters that will start making you think of ways that you can utilize all this information in the projects that you have in your own communities. If you have any questions, we'll try and get them answered to you during this webinar. And please click, if you look on your right below your name, there's a hand that's an icon there. Please click on that. Yes, just like that. And when you click on that, we will be answering your questions as they come by. And if you are having problems with your questions, after you click, you press on the talk button. What I would really want you to do is, after you finish your question, please click on the talk button again, because if not, then sometimes we have feedback that comes in, and the next person that asks their questions will be ineligible, illegible to hear. Okay? So please, if you have any questions, please click on that hand icon, and we will do our best to answer all of your questions. Okay, we have a question from Nalani. Nalani. You can click on your talk button and ask your question there.
Aloha, this is a question for Ku. Ku, I'm very, very interested in your HLPS. I'm working just newly hired by the Department of Ed to work on a project with the Hawaiian language immersion schools on identifying Hawaiian language proficiency levels. Where can I get more information, or to have a sit down with you? I know you're in Waipio. Is there a way that we can get together and share kuka and talk more?
Aloha Nalani. I'm sorry, I had my contact information on my last slide, and then I was told yesterday that there was going to be a way to contact me, so I took it off. Matt, can you help us out there?
Yeah, at the end of the presentation, after the Q&A session, we're going to have the contact info on screen, and then we'll just leave it up there, and you can copy it down at the end.
All right, so Nalani, once you have my email, just email me, and I come to Honolulu regularly, so we can definitely set up something.
Mahalo, Ku. I will look forward to meeting with you.
Okay, mahalo. We have a question that has been raised within the chat box, and that is by Hoku Lani Holt. Ku, how widespread is this assessment now?
Aloha, Holt.
Ku, I think you requested.
Okay, okay, here we are. It isn't widespread at this point. I haven't even finished writing it up because I got the grant right when I was about to write the paper, and since then I've been working practically on our basic Hawaiian program. We presented it in Bangkok in 2012 in September, as I said, right when we got the basic Hawaiian grant. So I'm planning on writing it up as a paper, but I have the information of it at this point, and right now we're only using it to assess basic Hawaiian because I haven't had a chance to even present on it anywhere in Hawaii at this point in time. But again, it's something that is for people to use or to adapt. You know, we're not saying we have all the answers, but we figured it's a good place to start, and we're open to suggestions.
Mahalo for that. So do any of you have any questions? Please raise your hand, and so that we can hear the questions from your own perspective, from your own voice. Derek, I know you wrote a question. I think the answer was provided to you within the chat box. So there will be a link to download the PowerPoint, and it'll be sent out after the webinar. Do you have any other questions? Yes. I see Hokulani, you have a question. Go ahead, then Nalani, you are after. Hokulani, you can go ahead with your question. Once you wrote it in the chat box, cool. If there are other resources, please let us know. Okay. And Nalani, you can go ahead with your question.
Mahalo, Keone, and again for you, Ku. I'm interested in the basic Hawaiian grant that you're working on. Is the basic Hawaiian actually being used anywhere in the islands now that we can either see a demo or participate?
This grant just got funded in August of last year, so we've been working on it this past year to do the initial development. We're going to start pilot testing in August of this year, and if you're interested, then email me at that email.
We lost you on the second part of that, Ku. If you can repeat that, that'd be great.
Okay, so we're going to start pilot testing in August, and if people are interested, they can email me in regards to that. The final full product, so we're going to be testing one unit at a time, kind of thing, as we're developing them. So the final product, Basic Hawaiian, will not be ready until spring 2015, when it will be available for the general public. But if people are interested in the interim to test, which means you will need to give us feedback of, as to how we're doing, we welcome that, and you can contact me at the email provided at the end of this.
Thank you, Ku. We have another question in the chat box. Kalamai, I won't try and butcher your first name, but we have a question that will there be another meeting in the near future regarding language assessment or other language topics? We have an active Google language groups that that shares information and is an open forum for those type of questions and sharing of information. We encourage you to join the Google language groups, and if you're interested, then we can send you a link to that. You have to be a Google Plus, have a Google Plus account for that, though. But if you are interested, just let us know. Then we can send you the links to that. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, we have a question by Derek. Go ahead, Derek. The question is in the chat. I am studying native languages in my college. I am interested in language revitalization in our people's language, Navajo or Diné, as we call our language. How can I improve myself as a Diné language tutor in regards to helping other students with language? I often visually act out or show the action of words that they have questions about. This is an open-ended question to either one of our our speakers, Dr. Quigley or Dr. Kahakalau. So either of you can answer that. Dr. Quigley?
I think it's a very good question, and Derek, I think what you're actually attempting to do already is very close to the different models associated with Asher's total physical response model. And we found the same thing in Seneca Language instruction, and I work with Menominee as well, where as much action and that you can do with the language, it's, if you're sitting down to eat, have all the instruments with you, talk about everything that you're using. The visuals are very powerful. Touching things are very powerful. So I would just do a little bit of research on teaching or pedagogical techniques associated with total physical response, because that sounds something like what you're trying to do already.
You have anything to add to that, Dr. Kahakalau?
I completely agree with Laurie. If you're a tutor, maybe getting out of the classroom or college situations, instead of doing it in the classroom, going to a park and having all the things that are there already and talking about those things, or going to a restaurant or eating, or doing something where you will not just learn the vocabulary but also the phrases kind of thing, and using it in context. So for us, really, that works the best is if the students are out there in the environment doing things and learning the words as they see them, as they smell them, as they feel them. So I really concur what Laurie had to say.
Mahalo for that. And Derek, if you could press your, thank you. We have another question by Rhonda. What is the protocol in arranging a visit to Seneca School? If you could answer that one, Dr. Quigley.
I can help to make those arrangements for you. If you email me, I will reply to your email and carbon copy, for example, the Head Start director or one of the Seneca language teachers who works in one of the other K-12 school settings.
Great, thank you for that, Dr. Quigley. Again, Matt has posted a link to the ANA Native Language Group. And so if any of you are interested in that, that will be really good. Okay, we have another question in the chat box, and this question is by Teresa Peterson. We are currently using ACTFL. I might have missed this, but are there specific downsides to using ACTFL? I really enjoyed the presentation, the presented assessment, and see that this work will take some time to adapt. Do any one of your of our presenters, can you respond to that, please?
Well, the ACTFL is really the main scale that is out there, and it was developed, I don't think, to measure native language proficiency. It was developed to test proficiency on people who were going to use the language for travel or for business. And so, to me, one of the things that it doesn't include are all the cultural pieces. And as a language teacher, for so many years, what has become more and more and more important to me as I've been traveling this road is really the importance of the culture to the language and the language to the culture, and a very different, and I think generally language teaching is moving in that direction of not separating language and culture, but integrating more and more and more culture. And I don't think that the ACTFL is set up at this point to do that. It's more of a mechanical language assessment, where I think ours is more of a language in context type of a direction that we want to go in.
Thank you for that, Ku. Dr. Quigley, you have anything that you want to add to that?
I would agree with what Ku just said. I always believe that, use what's out there and what's been tested and piloted, but I think it's important for all of us and all of our indigenous language communities to adapt these instruments to our own needs and our own languages. Because where there are similarities, there are still differences, and I think that when you begin to adapt things to your own, people do show more ownership and use and interest in those, and even tweaking them to make them even better for ourselves.
Mahalo for that, Dr. Quigley. We have another question from Derek. Go ahead with your question. Okay, the question is written in the chat box. How can I get the attention of my people in general? I feel that my people have the notion that since we have 120,000 to 169,000 total speakers of Navajo, they often say that it is not a cause to worry. How can I or others show that our language is in immediate attention? Because at 19 years old, I find that my peers often do not understand nor speak as much as I do. Many do not understand a whole sentence. So how can I or others present this as a huge urgency for our people? Again, it's an open-ended question to both of our presenters. Either one of you can respond to that.
I don't think you're experiencing anything that none of us working in languages has ever experienced. I mean, we've all experienced it. And we all continue to experience these things in our communities. I applaud you, as young as you are, for being so interested in maintaining language. I would hope that maybe ANA could help to answer this question by providing some statistical information on the state of languages across the country. I mean, I could certainly provide you information even on Seneca language use and how much it's declined over the years, but we are a much smaller group than Navajo. If you take a look at what Ku presented in her PowerPoint, the data is there about how they've actually increased language. Mohawks have been tremendous in this effort as well. But I think, you know, if you can find creative ways for young people to listen, whether it's creating something on YouTube, you know, young people love social media, but if you listen to what the elders have said too, where our language is where our cultures are held, you know, and I can provide you, any of us probably could provide you with information from what the elders have said about the importance of language, and we just hope that people listen, but I applaud you for the question.
Yeah, same here, Derek. It's a hard and a lonely road sometimes, and there's many times when many of us have felt like completely alone in terms of moving something forward, and yet at the same time, you know, I've seen tremendous changes in just my 50 years on this earth. So we just can't give up. We got to make it exciting, you know, surround yourself with others, do stuff that's fun, you know, that others want to be a part of in the language, or partially in the language, or you know, relating to the language as far as doing activities. You know, if you just start with 2 people and 3 people to go somewhere and use only the language while you're doing something cultural, and just keep on plugging away. We're facing the same thing, you know. I think every people has an issue with people not recognizing what is good for them in the long run, and just looking at the instant satisfaction, because language learning takes a while and people don't want to put in that time and effort. But just from my personal experience, it's one of those it's an exercise for us to learn patience and to believe and continue to exhibit the awesome expertise, the knowledge, the insights of our ancestors through the language, and hoping that, you know, one by one people will recognize that strength that we have because of the language that has been passed down to us from our ancestors.
Mahalo for that, Ku. I know this discussion can go on for many more hours, but we have to start wrapping this up. One response that I'd like to say from my experience, and Kalamai for my interjection, is that I was speaking with one person who was the lone language speaker of their tribe, and he is in his 50s, and I asked him how was it that he became the sole language speaker, and he said, you know, when we were growing up, there were hundreds of people that were speaking the language, but they were all elders, and no one in my age really spoke it. And so all of a sudden one day, all of the elders were gone, and I became the only one. And so sometimes we take it for granted that it will always be around, but in the reality of situations, that might not be true. So we'd like to thank you again for participating on this webinar. I would like to tell you that there is resources, the native language MOAs, and I would like to also talk to you a little bit about the upcoming webinars. The evaluation series part 4 comes up on how to use evaluation results to build community support and receive additional funding. August 1st, finding funding foundations, and August 8th, Sustainability Series Part 1. One other thing that I'd like you to know about is that there is an upcoming Native Language Professional Development webinar, and that will be happening in October. So on October 17th, we will be having a Native Language Professional Development webinar. Please put that on your calendar, and if you are on our listserv, you will be notified of this. If you are not on our listserv, please, I urge you to get on our listserv get on the ANA Native Language Google groups, and we will be discussing all of this. Again, mahalo ho'i a ʻōlua o Dr. Quigley me kauka Kahakalau. This is the contact information that we have for both Dr. Quigley and Dr. Kahakalau. And we thank all of you for your participation, and we'll keep this up for a little bit so that you can actually write it down. And again, mahalo ia ʻōlua I ko ʻōlua ha'i mai a mākou no ko ʻōlua mau ike. Thank you very much for both of you for your extreme depth of knowledge within this this very important aspect of language.
No o ka hauʻoli, mahalo ia ʻoe. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you. That brings an end to the presentation. Matt, do you have any final words?
Yeah, thank you, Keone. So, as Keone said, at this time we'll be ending the presentation. I'm going to paste a link to an evaluation survey that you can fill out to let us know how we did today. Your filling out this survey will help us to improve in the future and maybe offer more language-based webinars in the future. If you have any ideas for webinars that you'd like to attend or any specific subject areas within the greater category of native language education, you can add those into the comments section of that survey, and we'll look at those as we plan our next round of webinars. So that link is in the chat box, and at this time I am going to stop the recording. We'll send out a link to the recording when it's done, which would probably be sometime next week. And then I'll send out an email after this that'll include some of the handouts, a link for you to download today's PowerPoint, and then the contact info that you see on this screen summarized there. So thanks again for attending today's webinar, the Language Assessment and Proficiency Tools ANA National Webinar. Please join us again for one of our upcoming webinars. Thank you.